What's up, Dragon Ball Super Family? I'm Legends Michael Kick, and I'm here to bring you my top 8 deck profile from this weekend's MomoCon event. Apologies for the quality of the camera right now. I'm testing up a new setup, and we'll see how this one works out. This weekend was really fun. PPG ran a really tight event. We started at 11 a.m. and we finished by 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. Actually before 5 p.m. and they even threw in a lunch break. It was insane how smooth that event ran. It was BO1 pre-side for day one, and then top cut, cut the top 16, which is really generous of PPG, and then we played a best of three with seeding going first in top cut. My losses day one, my only loss was to my teammate and friend Jonathan Lanza. I made a critical misplay on turn 5, which cost me the match. And then I had some close games. I played against Hand Control, which is a miserable matchup, and I played against Frank Miller, who played the match actually really well, except for turn 5. That was his only misplay, and which allowed me to capitalize on the game on turn 8 for the win. So that was really pivotal because matching into Frank Miller and going 6 turns without awakening made me think I was going to lose there. And then when I matched the Hand Control, I thought I was going to lose, but man, I managed to pull out W's for those of those to get me into top 16. In top 16, I played the Mirror, in which since I was 8th seed going into top 16, I had the die roll going to the Mirror, which allowed me to make some aggro decisions to take the win there in both game 1 and 2. And then in top 8, I faced off against my other teammate and friend Jared Lopez, where I took 30 minutes to lose game 1, which is silly. I think that's the lesson I learned from this event. If you're in a best of 3 timed match, you need to know when to fold your cards. About 15 minutes in the game, I already knew I was going to lose, and I should have just folded there. That way I would have an ample amount of time to play out game 3. We started game 3 with about 5 minutes left on the clock, and there was just no way I was going to win. So it was a really good game, and I'm really glad to see Jared Lopez taking it down and Jonathan Lanza getting second there. So we really did clean up. We've been working hard to try to get good at this game, and we really enjoy playing the game together. So without further ado, here's my Golden Frieza deck profile. You've seen a couple of these, so it's not going to be too radically different. I'm going to try to gloss over some of the stuff that I've already done in the previous deck profiles and really focus in on the changes I've made or the changes I will make going forward, especially into the new format. We're going to be missing SS4, Gogeta, Sin Shenron, Red Sin Shenron, and Gamma Blue. Additionally, the removal of Dirty Burst from the game changes a lot. So let's talk about like Sin real quick. I think Sin is kind of dead content this format, mainly because of the yellow Sin. Like Red Sin is a bad deck now because of yellow Sin, so I'm not too that's not too big of a change. Gogeta leaving the game is a big deal, mainly because the Gogeta 8 is something that we always have to play around and set up. If you are playing in next week's event and you're seeing this video, and you want to play Golden Frieza and try to prepare for SS4, here's some tips. Going to your opponent's turn 4, make sure you have 2 Z energy up so that you can use the Vegito counterplay into their 8-drop in case they do slam the 8-drop, right? It kind of like deters them from doing it. If it doesn't, then they don't get to clear a field, which is a big deal. Relying on the Goku Z battle card to keep their leader from attacking for 1 turn means they lose a whole turn of tempo and generating draw. That's a really big deal too, right? Finally, you want to try to keep them at 6 life until they have a clear board, like they're missing a unison and they have no battle cards, and you can finally start pushing them down from 6 to like 3, maybe 2, and then go from 2 to 0. Or 2 to their Z Awakening, whichever one kills them first, right? Make sure you always respect the Vegito SCR. I definitely messed that up in teams today, costing my team first place. We ended up getting second place instead. So that was a bummer. But yeah, those are like the biggest tips I can suggest for the matchup. Obviously, do not attack any leader that you don't have to attack while you're in your front side. That just is a given. And then for the Gamma matchup, the way I have my deck built, it's for red, but moving forward, I mean, it doesn't matter because I'm only going to get one more event with this. It's only BO1 pre-side. But the way my deck is built, it's not built for Gamma game 1. But once you bring in a lot of the tools, you can beat Gamma. A lot of the ways to beat Gamma is just to snipe out their floodgates, right? Between like Tyrannical Blows and Coolers. And then by the time you resolve Frieza 5, it's really hard for Gamma to win the match. So that's just what you're building towards. You just have to survive early pressure versus them. Using the -3 on Gohan, giving your leader a bean, means it's that much harder for Gamma to push into you. Make sure you're clearing their unison as much as you can. Gamma doesn't draw that much if you don't give them their life, so you just leave them at their 6 life and keep clearing their field until you get to a point where your Frieza 5 comes down onto the board, or like your Cooler SCR comes down on the board, then you're in a much better spot. So without further ado, we're going to the deck list. The leader on both sides just KOs one of its own Frieza army cards. in the battle area to untap 1 and draw 1 on the front side, and then untap 2 and draw 1 on the back side. You want to be awakened as fast as you possibly can so you can start drawing 2 cards. Right, so you got to get really comfortable with this deck going to 4 life, like Roshiing yourself down to 4 as fast as you can, even versus aggro decks. A lot of times versus aggro decks like Red Sin or Red Gogeta, I'll still play Roshi on 1, just to take myself down to 7, so that their first 2 damage that they do to me puts me down to 5. That way on my turn 2, I can just go to 4 on my own, right? That's a big deal, because then you're drawing an extra card, and you got to think that every turn you're on your backside, right, of the game. Let's say you're only playing 2 through turns, like 6 turns throughout a game. If you can draw that extra card starting on turn 2, that's an entire extra resource you get throughout the game, rather than just staying on your front side to give your opponent one more turn of attacking you. Because chances are, even if you do stay on your front side, and like let's say you didn't take those 2 life for Roshi, they're going to take advantage of those 2 life on your front side and force you to awaken anyway on their terms, which is absolutely something you do not want. You miss out on an extra draw if you awaken on your opponent's turn, so that's a big deal too. So just going in, things we're going to mulligan for, you definitely want to look for at least 1 Roshi. That's why we play all 4 copies of Roshi. Something to note, it is a mandatory shuffle when you do the activate main on Roshi. If you choose to play the Moon Destroying Kamehameha in a slower format, it might be a good idea to play that card again, simply because it does give you a free charge for Right Pass, and we're not playing that many extra cards, so it's actually kind of hard to find charges for Right Pass. Unless you have extra Frieza calls sitting around, it's hard to charge the rest of your extra cards. You obviously want to look for one of your 4 copies of Frieza Call. I've said it previously in videos, I'm going to say it again. You only want to resolve 1 or 2 Frieza Calls a game. The rest of your Frieza Calls, after you once you have like the higher dragon unison, the rest of your Frieza Calls you just want to charge so they can set up your right pass and ensure that your right pass is secure. Since I play like a large amount of overarms in the game, in the deck, you can't really rely on the extra cards in your drop to continue sustaining your robotic right pass. The full suite of the 8 copies of the Tagoma and Ginyu, they just say draw a card and then you KO them to fulfill your leader effects. 4 copies of the higher dragon. It's obviously a card you want to be able to see after you awaken or on the turn that you awaken, and not before. You definitely don't want to play this card like before you awaken, because then it gives your opponent's leader a free attack target. In fact, while you're on your front side, just make sure your opponent can't choose to attack anything but your leader, right? So like that means only leaving battle cards in active mode, or like not having any battle cards in the battle area at all, especially versus Majin Vegeta, since they have the ability to just tap down your battle cards and then attack them with your leader. With their leader to get their draw off. So that's something else to note. Other than that, like, this card's really good. Obviously, it just pluses 1, brings up one of these guys, becomes a 15k attack, and then you can sacrifice it off with your leader to draw a card, untap some energy, which pretty much gives you a free actual +1 energy instead of having to hard cast one of these. And then of course the 0 actually does come up sometimes too. Let's say you're under Black Mask Saiyan, or you're under the red Vegito Unison. You can just use the +0 to draw a card. Some of the interactions to note: if you have a Frieza's army token that you had left over from your previous opponent's turn, that also counts as a skillless card that causes this card to become a 15k to attack with. 3 copies of the SS3 Son Gohan Z Fighter. I still only play 3 copies. It still bounces back between 3 and 4 copies. I've never wanted the 4th copy, and I hate playing this card without having a pre-developed unison. The only time I ever want the 4th copy is if I like -3 on one, then play another -3 on that one, then play another -3 on that one. Then I'm like, oh man, I wish I had a bunch of extra copies of this card. But in that scenario, you're already winning the game. So it doesn't make me feel like I actually want to add more copies of this card to the deck. This card is really good versus yellow and versus blue because their 2 most popular floodgates aren't affected by this card. Both defending friends and robotic riposte, this card just gets around. Plus the bean effect on your leader makes you really tricky to beat on the following turn. Even versus stuff like Gogeta, SS4, starting your lead off at 20k means you only owe the 8 drop 2 super combos when they attack. 4 copies of robotic riposte. It's a Frieza's army after it gets popped, which is a really big deal. You can obviously it negates the attack. Make sure you have it set up like I said with Frieza Call. One other trick to learn with this card is after you sideboard in, and in the future I'll probably just mainboard this card, Frieza Malicious Streak. Like on your turn 3 or your awakening turn, you can Frieza Call this card out for 1 energy, right? You can pop, and as long as you obviously meet the conditions to play robotic riposte, you can use your activate main on the front side to pop this card, untap the 1 that you spent for Frieza's Call, and draw a card, and then this will take your life from 5 to 4 if you need to. And then this will let you actually play one of the riposte from hand, right? Giving you a 15k attack to either attempt attempt to like clear a battle card or maybe check a unison for one. Then after you awaken, you can actually spend all 3 energy doing something. Whether that's developing the Goku from the Z deck, developing the Vegeta from the Z deck, and then you can just sacrifice this Frieza to get your 2 energy up for your opponent's turn, which is actually like a really monumental play. Going forward, because this gives you actually a huge swing turn. It lets you play stuff like Slug into the deck if you really wanted to consider sideboarding Slug. It also lets you play stuff like the Goku that increases the cost of extra cards by 1, because it lets you just tap out on your Awaken turn and then still have a target to sacrifice, all for the investment of 1 energy, right? Which is pretty cool. And the both cards kind of replace themselves, so it's definitely not as plus in terms of card resource advantage if you as if you just played a bunch of 1-drops and did it. But in terms of tempo swing, it's actually a really big play to note. Following that Floodgate, we have 3 copies of this SS Vegeta Overwhelming Might Floodgate. If this deck becomes really popular and the mirror match starts coming up, this card is actually going to be really big in the mirror match. So, because you obviously, like I said earlier, Riposte doesn't affect the Son Gohan Z fighter. So you're either going to have to use Release from Evil or use this as the Floodgate to get around that, which is really cool too. Something to note, just make sure you have your 2Z set up to make sure this card is live. And then the Supreme King of the deck, and why I think the deck is so good right now, is Sin Shenron Cold-Hearted Shadow Dragon. The card, it can be easily set up as early as like turn 2, right? Because you can freeze a call twice and then leave have like a battle card left on the in the battle area or in your Z energy and have 2 energy. And now this card just costs 2 energy to play down. Um, it it has Deflect Unique Barrier Blocker, and then effectively on your turn, it has like dual attack, right? Because everybody is either playing a Floodgate or they're playing like the negate blockers, which then will just stand this card back up and negate that negate blocker's blocker ability. Right, so that card's kind of ridiculous. The fact that it replaces itself is really nice too. I'm actually going to bump this card to 4, I think, because it makes it so that I don't have to defend this card as hard, right? Like, now I can just freely block with it twice, watch my opponent spend 2 cards of combo power and their attack into it, and then so I'll let this die, and this has effectively traded 0 for like 3, because I drew a card with this. And then I can just develop another one later down the line. This card's like really toxic. I'm afraid to ask for emergency ban on this card, but I do think there should be one. I also spent money on this card, so if the emergency ban happens, like, it would suck for me too. But I think it is like the best card in the game right now. It prevents a lot of big boss monsters from being able to play the game. It prevents a lot of cards from being able to play the game. And the fact that it has so much natural protection on itself, just creating a TP promo that like prevents it from blocking isn't enough. This will tell you what my SCR is, but 4 copies of the Krillin Moments Before Comeback Super Combo. I think this is just necessary in this deck. You have so many extra cards and non-comboable unisons that being able to dig through your deck and get rid of those cards out of your hand in combo fights is a really big deal. Additionally, like, finding your finishing pieces like Cooler or going into unison, drawing to your outs is really important in this deck too. This of course just helps you facilitate that. I'm still on 3 copies of Secret Identity Master, and I still do not veer away from this. This is like my first and foremost the way to clear aggro pieces. Like I said, versus Gamba, it clears the 4 and 2 really well, like the Android 14, and then the twins, the green and blue twins versus Red Sin. It clears the Dread Destroyer plus the Nova versus Gogeta. It clears like any of the 4-drops. It clears Rush Attack with a 4-drop. It's pretty nuts. And then most importantly, it clears like Raditz the Oppressor, Whis the whatever, the things that punish you for like trying to untap energy with the leader. Like it's a 0 mana answer to those cards while being a 25k swing, right? Like it's just too functional for this deck to not play. The only other card I'd probably consider playing in this spot is probably 1 copy of the new Vegeta Overround, because sometimes we do have trouble clearing SCRs. Like the only the only way we have clearing SCRs is playing our 5-drop or going into the Vegeta 3-drop from the Z deck, which does not have deflect, which is actually a problem in like yellow mirror matches or yellow matches, because they can just tyrannical blow that Vegeta and now you're not KOing their SCR. Now you have to find another way to clear the SCR, which is a problem, right? If the SCR is in rest mode, like you can use the Gohan Z battle or the Gohan Unison card to clear it. That helps, but if they just leave it in active mode, it's really hard for you to clear safely. 2 copies of Frieza Army Reinforcement. This card is probably simultaneously the most useless and useful card in the deck. Once you're at 4, this card's really pointless. It feels like every deck has a way to answer this card between like Secret Identity, some way to negate it, or some way to like send it to the drop before it gets to block. But like when you're at 5, this card's like the best card in the game, especially because a lot of people try to double strike you while you're on your unawakened side, or they try to get a crit in, like a cheeky crit, because they'll think you'll either have to riposte, leaving yourself at 5, or you'll just have to take the crit, right? And either way, they won. So you can just trade this card for the crit. It just becomes a different card out of your life. It now is an extra card in the drop. But most of the time, I find myself charging this card. I can't like bring myself to bring it to 3, no matter how much I want to play it at 3, because of the aforementioned reasons. 2 copies of Realm of the Gods. This card's significantly worse now that aggro is like much worse in the format. I found myself siding it out every day every game except for versus SS4 Gogeta and versus Majin Vegeta. Majin Vegeta does attack with a lot of 20Ks and 25Ks, so that's where this card comes up, especially because that Goku Vegeta duo, whatever that card is called, it attacks for 20K double strike, and a lot of times they like to leave it at 20K. So you can use this to try to get yourself out of it, tap down their 19K before they can tap it down to prevent a draw. So it's really good in that matchup. It's obviously really good versus aggro, but versus everything else, it's either an auto charge or an auto side out. I decided to main deck 1 copy of Tyrannical Blow this event because I knew I would have to play best of 3 in Top Cut. So I wanted to have some chance versus the Mirror and Gamma, or just like slower decks in Top Cut. And lo and behold, I played Golden Frieza and Gamma in Top Cut. So the Tyrannical Blow obviously came up. 1 copy of Flying Nimbus. Whether that's an aggro format or not, Flying Nimbus is just super powerful. I've already talked about in my previous videos how versus yellow matchups, it's much more important to have versus yellow and blue. Actually, it's much more important to have Flying Nimbus on turn 5 and beyond rather than Riposte on turn 5 and beyond, simply because Riposte always gets answered with Tyrannical Blow, right? It's a really easy response for them to put down Tyrannical Blow for 1 energy to answer your 1 energy play. But if you're only spending 1 energy on Nimbus and then they have to decide to spend the rest of their turn, or half of their turn in the case of yellow for 3 energy, or the rest of their turn in the case of blue for 5 energy to stop your Nimbus, that's a different story, right? Like your opponent's turn becomes significantly weaker by having to use their cooler. Also, a lot of times in the yellow matchup, you're trying to force the other player's cooler down first. A lot of decks are only playing 1 or 2 coolers now. You can kind of track how many coolers your opponent is playing based on how they're playing the game. So if you can force out that 1 cooler, now they don't have it to answer your cooler or your Bloodlust for a play that actually matters down the line. 1 copy of Final Flash. This card was completely useless all weekend. I might have used it to combo for 15K out of one thing once. I might have charged it the rest of the time, but it's just the card I play for respect. 1 copy of Cold Bloodlust. The card is terrible versus red decks currently. The only card it hits in red decks is the Gohan counterplay. Other than that, this card has done nothing for me all weekend. It is really good, obviously, versus red and versus yellow and blue. I actually charged it in my team wars today versus red because it's just pointless. 1 copy of Power the Super Saiyan. This card has become like my least favorite card in the deck. Obviously, you play 1 copy of it because you can just cantrip it. It effectively makes your deck a 53 card deck. It's always an extra card that you can charge, and if you need to use it, you just cycle your deck 1 card deeper. And when it shines, it's really good. Like if it gets a tap down on Boo, it's really good. If your opponent accidentally attacks with a leader first because they don't know what they're doing and they have battle cards on the field, it's really good. But those rarely happen at high levels of play, so most of the time this card's getting very little value. I actually had to teach myself this weekend to just charge this card a lot of the time, just to make sure I turn on Riposte, right? And then part of the misplay I made against John Lanza in Swiss was not using this card to dig for an extra card when I was going for game. Instead, I tapped myself out first. That was really silly because I actually checked the top of the deck after the game was over. It was a super combo, so that would have been playing towards my outs. But if I just chosen to charge this instead of choosing to charge the 5K in my energy, that would have made a world of difference as well. So this card, it really is a bait lately. This card is still just such a monster versus like the mirror match versus yellow versus green versus red, probably versus black. It's just not good versus Dirty Burst, right? I did find myself siding at least 1 copy out a lot of the day, and obviously both copies out versus blue because they could just Dirty Burst it. But versus yellow or versus any of those other colors, it actually just does an insane amount of work. Because if most yellow decks end pass their turn with 2 energy up, so if you can develop this and you can attack with it, their first response will be to Riposte, right? So if you Tyranny Blow the Riposte, this will tap down the other energy, and now yellow is finally tapped out for you to go all in on, and you can probably kill in that same turn. Obviously, versus green, this is really strong because green either has to keep up a unison, which you will either Smoky Dragon or focus all your attacks into, or they have to keep up an energy for Dormant or Cells Kamehameha. If it's the former, you can cooler it. If it's the second, you have no interaction with it. This lets you tap down their energy. Same with red. A lot of times they're relying on a Gohan counterplay, or they're relying on like imposing or something like that, or Frieza's Death Ball to get out of the attack. Super important there. I don't know what black does because I haven't seen that color in like 6 months, so I can't tell you how this would impact that matchup. But I imagine this would probably be useful there. Also, the ability to clear boards. This is one of our ways to clear SCRs without having to go into that Vegeta, right? So that's something to think about as well. Moving forward, I'll probably only play one copy of this card in this deck. I'm not sure. I saw a really cool version of the deck by William Brown, who was piloting 3 copies of this card in his deck, and the Hercule Unison or Z battle card this weekend. That was really cool because the Hercule has barriers, so it just sits on the board, or if you like develop a Goku, it just sits on the board. And then this card only requires your opponent to have 3 energy for it to be played. I also learned that this weekend. I always thought I had to have 4 energy to play this card, so I've been playing it a whole turn later, which is like sawing my own leg off to try to win the game. So now that I realize it's your opponent only has to have 3 energy, I might keep it at 2 and keep play testing it with this newfound knowledge and see what more advantage I can build. 2 copies of Frieza Divine Transformation. This card's insane. Sided out versus red because they can just neg right through it. I don't know what else to say about that. And then of course the 1 copy of Cooler. Card's just such an equalizer. He knew I would talk about this, but versus my match with Frank Miller, I had like 6 cards in my. I had exactly 6 cards in my hand to his like 16, going into turn at the end of his turn 8 and the start of my turn 8. And I knew like my only out was I knew from turn 5 my only out was to win through Cooler because he had prevented my awakening for 6 turns and he had his Gohan Z battle card out there. Or not Gohan Z battle card, Gohan Unison out there, and he was just drawing a ridiculous amount of cards while keeping my hand low. I was forced to play my Higher Dragon unawakened to try to find a Roshi to get myself to awaken. He just never let me get there. So I knew I had to wait to hold Cooler, or wait to use my Cooler paired with my Cooler, because I knew he played Death Blaster. And even if I didn't know that he played Death Blaster, he's just a good player, so he's gonna have Death Blaster in his Majin Vegeta deck. So I forced out his. Well, I can't say I forced it out. I made plays that would make him want to use Cooler early in the game, which he did to keep the tempo up. And so then I was banking on him only playing 1 Cooler. So then I spent the super combo at the end of his turn 8 to try to dig for this card, and I did dig into my out. I had only like 11 cards left in deck maybe. And then going into my turn 8, I was able to bring up a 1-drop. With my Higher Dragon, then I could slam this down for 5. He would slam Death Blaster. I would use my Cooler counter, and then now we resolved it, and suddenly I was in the driver's seat, right? Because he lost his entire hand, his board. He was down to 5 cards in hand, and then I was just in the driver's boat. Something to note, and I forgot about it during that match. Was he activated his Sin Shenron on the field to negate this card's skill. I forgot that this card gains barrier as part of its auto, so I could have actually just kept attacking with this card. I should have, in hindsight. I didn't think about that, and I only dealt 1 damage to him with the attack. But that's just something for me to know. And in that matchup, in the Majin Vegeta matchup, if you do slime Cooler, obviously your opponent's going to use their Z leader effect to clear the board. You want them to clear the board on your turn. That way they don't have access to the extra attack power and the double strike on their turn, right? The Cooler already did its job. It equalized the game for you, your head and card economy, and you took them down to 1 line. There's no SCR that could do more than that in that scenario, right? So then I got to start his turn 9 with 2 of my energy up. He had 4 cards in hand going to his turn 9, and I already had 6 or 7 or 8, depending on how many cards I drew that turn. It was kind of ridiculous, and that let me end out the game. That's the entire 54 card main deck, sorry. I've talked about it before, but this is one of the few decks I would play above 50. You deck yourself out. Pretty common. In fact, in teams today, I nearly decked myself in one of my games, so it just comes up. You gotta make sure you limit your draws, and that's another reason why you don't want to resolve all 4 Frieza's calls in a game. It seems cool that you're thinning out your deck, but thinning out your deck too fast, just knowing how many turns in a game you have to play is a really big deal, right? In yellow or blue matches, you're probably gonna have to play 7 or 8 turns, so you don't want to just keep Frieza calling and then thinning your deck out to the point where you just lose. Going into the side deck, we have 1 copy of the Extra Self Awakener, which I will probably play in the main moving forward. Still 2 copies of Release from Evil. I realize that the threat of this card is too good versus Gamma. It's also really good in the mirror match because when they use the Gohan Z or Unison card and they -3, you can just release from it. It can't get all 3 attacks off anymore. It just gets that 125k attack off. That's a really big deal. But versus Gamma, like the fact that if you charge one ever in that matchup, they can no longer attack their leader. Then that's more than enough for me. And then it also helps in my top 8 matchup versus Jared Lopez because we get to see each other's deck list. He knows I played, like he got to see my side deck and he knows I played the card. So I didn't even bother siding in versus him at that point because I knew he would never attack with his leader ever again. And lo and behold, he never attacked with his leader ever again, right? Despite the fact that I didn't side it in. That's just that second level that you have to think about when you're going to these matches. One copy of Son Goku, a gift from Earth. I thought this was a good way to clear in the mirror match to knock down the Son Gohan Unison card. It for 2 energy, you can it costs 1 less for every counter or whatever life on Unisons amongst all Unisons in the Unison areas. So he comes down for 2. And then he can Spirit Boost for 2 to become a 25k double strike. But when he does Spirit Boost for 2, if your opponent's Unison has 3 or more markers, you can actually Spirit Boost this 2 off of your opponent's Unison. It's really good for like killing Boos, and it's really good versus Yellow for killing the Gohan Unison. One copy of Death Blaster, respect card for the mirror, respect card for like Android 21. That's just an extra copy of Bloodlust if you think of it that way. Extra copy of Vegeta's Final Flash for new Android 21. One extra copy of Nimbus for aggro. One extra copy of Tyrannical Blow for yellow and blue. One copy of Jiren for just blue in general. Even if they don't turning the tide on you, a lot of times you're going to have like 18 cards in your hand, and they're going to want to play that Goku card, so this actually prevents the Goku card from sending your hand back. 2 copies of Cooler. No, I didn't play any in the main today. That might have been a mistake. I mean, it didn't come up in my top 8 matches at all. Except maybe versus Jared it might have mattered. But other than that, like in best of 1 pre-side, you can just keep moving the coolers around. 2 copies of Koitsukai is probably my least favorite card all day. Nobody plays into this card anymore. And then 2 copies of Smoke Dragon for those decks that play the 2 mana Unisons. What else to say about this card? This card's also there for hand control on the off chance you match against hand control. Koitsukai is there for the same reason. Not to like get rid of charismatic villain or dissuade charismatic villain, but simply it's really big in the mirror match and the red Gogeta SS4 matchup. 1 copy of Oolong, card just exists, never played it. 2 copies of the Vegeta remove threats, and 2 copies of Gamma. If I keep testing that SS3 Goku, I might turn one of these into Hercule. I thought that was really cool, and I'll figure out something to turn into this Goku. I'll probably cut the Oolong. I really don't know yet, but I'll figure that as I go. That was the entire deck list. Super fun weekend. We had 4 teammates out there between Riti, Lopez, Lanza, and I. And 3 of us made it in the top 16. 3 of us made it in the top 8, actually. And then 2 of us were in the finals. It was really fun playing with those guys. Team Wars is the whole reason we go to these events because we just get to play with each other and have fun. We just get to chill and relax. So I really enjoyed that. MomoCon was really, or not MomoCon, but the event at MomoCon was run really well. Shout outs to PPG and George Machado for doing that. Shout outs to my team. We always have fun playing together. Shout out to my crew that travel with me and the guys who test with me all the time and my friends. It was just such a blast. Shout out to all the people I met at the event. It was super fun. I always love interacting with you guys and talking shop with you guys, so that was really fun. Hope to catch you guys at the next one.